Good evening, everybody. Class is in session, yes. I want to thank Gigi and all the people who helped her arrange this great conference. And, hopefully it will be repeated every year. This is the sort of thing that has to go on with independent thinkers. I love the last speaker because I haven't been in jail yet, but I have a little family has them. But the whole issue is the soul, the human soul. That's what we're here for. We can't forget that. And as long as we understand the importance of that, we'll be out there fighting. People often ask me, how come you keep at this for so long, Charlotte? What got you going? And I said, they think I'm so wonderful because I keep going. No, it doesn't have anything to do with that. I just plain got mad. And I stayed mad, and I kept having documents thrown at me, because I was working in the US Department of Ed in the early 80s. And I saw what they were doing to our children. I couldn't believe that they were so blatant. And I'll show you some of them. But I just couldn't. How can you stop? You know, even if you decide, oh, I've got to have my social life and do this or that, you can't avoid seeing children. They're around us all the time. How can you look in a child's eyes and say, well, somebody else will take care of that? No, can't do it. So anyway, I do have here something that I consider far better than anything I've ever written. And I hope everybody who's involved in, I call it Communist Corps because that's what it is. And I admire all of you parents, if any of you are here, in going up against it, because you have managed to generate a lot of interest in education, which prior to this time, there just wasn't that much amongst parents. The old saying is, you'll know it's true when it happens to you. Well, finally, what had been going on for, I would say, ever since the 60s in education, happened to the parents. They woke up because they're seeing it clearly. Before, they were just control groups in each state, which were having the national assessment. So I want to thank whoever is here in regard to Common Core for that. But I'm going to talk about the subject of diversion too. But this particular paper here, you can get it, write this down, at newswithviews.com. And it's written by a very close friend of mine. Her name is Anita Hogue. And Anita is one of those great Americans, brilliant. In fact, she testified, and she was out at Stanford on computer technology and assessment. She was invited to testify before all those high-up guys in the 90s because she understood assessment that well. Now, she's written this is in regard to Common Core and assessment, and it's called, do I need my glasses or not? I hope not. Oh, here they are. Good. I just had new eyes, so I can see pretty well, but sometimes with reading I can't. So these are my second eyes, they were cheap too. Anyway, this is called Abolishing Representative Government Through Education. Common Core, Choice, and Charter Schools. Transforming America one city at a time. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but just I want you to understand this is the most important thing being written on education today. There's everything out there about Communist Core. Take the time to get this. Is this country at a tipping point? How do you transform our republic? There are four main issues which she discusses in this article. Governance, removing locally elected school officials. That's the school choice agenda. Right? Tax money going into private education, no elected boards, following the model of charter schools, which are international, by the way. They're in Russia, too. They are for school to work. That's what I'm going to discuss tonight. Funding, ushering in federal choice and vouchers under the reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act which will change our system of taxing and financing schools to one where the funding will follow the child. This is also a means to control private schools and expand charter schools. Charter schools, replacing your local neighborhood school with a zealous for-profit agenda, corporations, right? So that there will no longer be parent or voter input or elected school boards, specifically with an aim to kill public education. And I want to point out now, if I forgot to put it later on, the former head of Xerox called on President Obama, Lou Gerstner, in the Wall Street Journal, called on President Obama 5 years ago and last July to pull down all 16,000 public school districts. That should scare you more than anything else happening in this country. What does he mean? He doesn't mean the brick and mortar. He wants to get rid of the elected school boards. You will have no say, and even if they kill Communist Core, if you allow the school choice agenda to go forward, your child will end up in a school with a Common Core that is probably even worse, because nobody will be complaining about it because you will not have an elected official to go to. And the last thing, Common Core standards, ushering in a system of individualized psychotherapeutic learning, the standardization of teaching, testing, and technology in all 50 states, nationalizing education, and challenging traditional education based on academics to a workforce training model. No grades, no competition, no K through 12, graduate at 14 or 21. That's the model. It copies the Soviet education model. I have the Soviet, we've got the Soviet paper that some educators brought over in 1959 after Eisenhower signed the first agreement with the Soviet Union, merging all of our services and everything. Eisenhower did that. In 1958, in 1959, the Office of Education sent about 20 educators over to the Soviet Union to do a report on Soviet education. And we were lucky enough to get it through, guess how? Our farmer in Ohio was at the state capitol one day, one of our people, wasn't really looking for anything in particular. I think he needed something to do with seeds. And he found the report lying on a table somewhere. It's at my son's website, AmericanDeception.com, on Soviet education. That's what's going in now. Because we have to have the Soviet polytech system. That's the global system going in for our children. No more education. Training. And C.S. Lewis put it well when he said, he's great, he uses a few words, I need a lot more than C.S. Lewis. When training beats education, civilization dies. There will be no more art, no more music. Your child will be put into a slot determined by the public-private partnerships, the corporations which are dictating everything that goes on in the schools now. They're getting rid of academic teachers, they don't need them anymore, everything's computers, no more books. The workforce training system, which I will explain to you where it came from, which is pretty frightening in itself, is the name of the game. Lifelong learning, we call it limited learning for lifelong labor. Sound familiar? That's what's going in. And that's why don't let the standards issue divert you too much, please. Because the issue is basically to stop all forms of school choice that are tax funded. There's only one real school choice. And that's what we've always had, where you have to sit down, and it's very painful, and you write a check. The minute you take a penny of federal money, or state or tax, or even local, you're controlled. You have to take that nasty assessment that all the parents are upset with Communist Core. And I love calling it Communist Core because that's what it is. Absolutely. Oh, by the way, there's a picture of Alger Hiss. He was bringing back the UN Charter. This is Life magazine. Hey, Alger, how are you? Well, you succeeded. We got it in the schools now. Okay, now, the goal since the 1900s, how far back it goes. A socialist global system to create the new Soviet man. Worker bees, Carnegie Corporation has been in bed for a long time pushing this thing in. You could call it corporate fascism, socialism, communism. We're not an innocent form of government. But basically, when I'm talking about the school to work agenda, that's definitely communism. And I want to point out that one of the honchos for this system going in, his name is David Hornback. He was the superintendent he's Carnegie Corporation, right? Superintendent of schools in Maryland way back when. And he called for mandatory community service. That's the plan. We will all be required to do mandatory community service. Now, in order for them to get this agenda in, lifelong, what I'm talking about, this horrible agenda, the global computerized system requires that every heartbeat on this planet be in the computer. There can be no gaps. No homeschoolers left out there, no private school, no religious school. By the way, the Catholics are in major trouble because they're using one of Carnegie's top people, a professor, a behavioral psychologist by the name of Lee Schulman, who was responsible for half the inner city kids dropping out in Chicago after the Skinner method was used on them for 12 years. He was responsible for that. He's received nothing but promotions all the way through, even at one time being the president of the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching. Now, I would not have found this out, what I'm going to tell you, without the help of a really good friend who's Catholic, who's been doing tremendous research on Common Core as it applies to Catholic education. Believe it or not, the Catholics are really moving big time with Common Core going into Catholic schools. And I just read this thing to her out of Chicago, because I have the old papers from the Chicago Mastery Learning, where half the inner city kids dropped out. Education Week called it a human tragedy of enormous proportions. Well, the man in charge, Lee Schulman, is now, hey, I didn't know, I wondered where he'd gone. He's in charge of Catholic Common Core. So that's for anybody, well, it's for all of us. I mean, if you lose the Catholic education, which really was the only thing left that was pretty good education, there's nothing left. Now, the way they're going to take us down, this has been planned for many, many years, and we have the original documents on community education, it's called. We fought it in Maine. I was a local school board member in Maine before I went into the U.S. Department of Ed, working for Reagan. But we killed community ed. Community education, well, you've all heard of school-based clinics, right? Most of you parents know about school-based clinics, setting up a lot of the facilities in the public school that have always been taken care of separately through doctors, whatever, not part of the education system. But the community education plan will be what we have. We will all be under the unelected board of the community school, which will not be teaching academics. It will be mostly workforce training, lifelong. So don't think if you're my age, you're gonna get, oh yeah, the National Alliance of Business said that anybody my age would be exempt from workforce training. So hey, how many, no, I'm the oldest person here, I think. Oh, look at all of you out there with your workforce training. That's what the corporations want you to do. Well, anyway, so community ed, everybody, birth through death, womb to tomb. And there's a good article, again by the same person, Anita Hogue, H-O-G-E, the one I mentioned, who's written this great document that I hope you will look up, Google it, go to newswithviews.com for her latest article. But she has a wonderful study called Womb to Tomb. You can Google it. I'm sorry to bring you this bad news, but there's also some good news coming. So every heartbeat on this planet, so you've got the little Zulu in the grass in Kenya behind his green screen. You can learn anywhere now, so you don't have to be no brick and mortar. And he's part of that computer data, just like the homeschoolers who think they're not going to be. Everybody has to be in the system. School choice is the vehicle. Did you ever think such an innocent sounding thing like school choice is the vehicle to get every child in the computer worldwide? Now, all I'm saying is if we took all the documents that we have, starting back at the end of the last century, late 1800s actually, and went into a court of law, the judge would laugh and he'd say, guilty, hands down. This is absolutely the greatest tragedy that has taken place in public education. And the teachers have been fighting behind closed doors, believe it or not. And everybody beats up on teachers. When you find out the history of this, what I'm going to be giving you today, you will know that this whole system, this whole education thing would have crashed. We would have had school choice long ago. We would have had the Skinner method across the board, which of course it is now because of computers, Pavlov. Long ago, they've been fighting. Not all, some of them are. Why would I have written the great big book, Deliberate Dumbing Down of America, with all the documentation that I have? If I supported public education, to the extent that you think I am right now, I do. I support public education over the destruction of the system that we had, the greatest education system in the world pre-1965. That's where we have to go back to. Because the alternative is Lou Gerstner, Bill Gates, the Heritage Foundation, by the way, that is supporting the parents who are upset about Communist Core. Heritage Foundation drafted the North American Free Trade Agreement. So how upset could they really be about Communist Core? Communist Core and school choice go together. It's like apple pie without the cheese is like the kiss without the squeeze. School choice and charters, school choice, charters, and Communist Core work together because Communist Core is workforce training. It's a completely different kind of education, Marxist, critical thinking, etc. So I haven't dealt much with Communist Core because we've had that for many, many years, ever since the federal government, the Northwest Regional Lab out in Portland, Oregon, developed 50,000 goals for the schools and set them all over. This was in the 1970s. So you think we haven't had this? In Maine, we had health education, and one of the objectives for this is 9th graders, so it's not kindergarten at least, it would be kindergarten now, was for them to understand the 3 types of sexual intercourse, including with animals. Yeah, yes. And so that's what they wanted our children to understand. Now, if people think, so I'm trying to say Communist Core is bad. We've had it for a long time. We've had terrible curriculum. We've had terrible objectives, all out of UNESCO, basically, UN. Let me point out, the UN agenda, UNESCO agenda, out of 20 education advisors, this was in the 70s, this is saying now, 19 came from communist countries. 19 out of 20. And we wonder why we've got communist core? We also have it because President Reagan signed the agreements with Gorbachev that merged the two education systems in 1985. And we've had that, and Carnegie signed the agreement with the Soviet Academy of Science, which were unbelievable, to work together to develop computer courseware for early elementary school children in critical thinking. Critical thinking for early elementary, think about it. It's all no absolutes. Lenin defined thinking as nothing is absolute. Everything is changing. So that's communist core. That's why 1 and 1 is 3. So anyway, that's the first part of my talk. Now I'm going to go back a little bit and let you all know that I really do come from Long Island. I grew up here. It's great to be back where I was born many years ago and where I spent the first 23 years of my life. Memories flood into my consciousness, gas rationing during World War II, rooting for the Brooklyn Dodgers at Ebbets Field before they moved, being Bill Tilden's U.S. tennis champion way back, doubles partner at the local tennis club, weekends at Jones Beach, walking 3 miles on Port Washington Boulevard to school. Just about every day I'm back because I was a latchkey child. My parents would have been, locked up, I guess, with no one to pick me up at school or drive me home. My mother was rarely at home. She was a Red Cross volunteer during World War II at Mitchell Field. She took care of our injured boys being flown in from the European front. I could go on and on recounting stories of those wonderful Long Island days, but I'm here today to join with a magnificent group of patriots in what has so far been the most interesting, hopefully productive. It better be, just don't go home and forget it all, please. You can have a glass of wine if you need, or maybe 2. I'm planning on that, I can tell you. Okay, all right. Before I get going, please know that all I'm going to talk about today, and much more that I don't have time to discuss with you, is either at my website, that's deliberatedumbingdown.com, where my original, this is key, if you don't want to buy anything from me, ever, even in the future, you don't have to, because it's all at my website, deliberatedumbingdown.com, and my big fat book, the original, that's out of print, is a free download. I use it myself. It's a lot easier than carrying my 4-pounder around and trying to find the page and all. You could go into the index, whatever you want. Look down the index, you're just going to go, ooh, and you'll see stuff that, well, you just go click, find the page, cut and paste, send your superintendent, and say, ooh, look what I found. Look what the commissioners of education were doing in 1976 in 1-week vacation in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Woo! Everything that's going on right now. Community service, community ed, no grades, individual education plans. Google Reinventing Schools Coalition, and you will know what's coming down the pipe for your children. Yeah, RISC it's called. It's a good name, RISC, but with a C. They misspelled RISC. R-I-S-C. So anyway, you don't have to buy anything, but I do have a disc set that we just finished. There are about 17 or 18 hours of videotape presentations of leading researchers, educational researchers in this country who are not affiliated in any way with the Republicans or the Democrats, or any large conservative groups. I might point out that everything I've ever written has been boycotted by the conservative movement. That should tell you something. But that's why it's lucky we have that downloaded, Deliberate Dumbing Down. Nobody can boycott stuff that gets on the internet. So the Trotskyites are a big problem. And it's no wonder Americans don't have a clue about what's going on in education or what happened pre-1965, after 1965. We had the best system of education in the world before 1965. And my books are Back to Basics, Reform, Soviets in the Classroom. That was about the agreement Reagan signed. And, you know, my Deliberate Dumbing Down. And the latest thing is called Exposing, which I hope you all will go. It's for sale here too, but I forgot. You don't have to buy anything from me. But this latest one is so good because we've got the public school teachers, we've got the greatest researchers going back to the 60s in these presentations in the disc set, the 8 disc set, exposing the global road to ruin through education. And we also, it's a toolkit. You can use it in the community with all the different groups in the community. Show these videos that are from really knowledgeable people who do not have a political agenda. We've got to watch out for the people with political agendas. Just think straight, have a conscience, and do what's best for your children and for the teachers of this country. They are really being, and talk about teachers, you better watch out teachers, because they don't want good teachers anymore. They've got Teach for America now. They got these young college kids coming out who've all been trained in Marxism to go to the classroom and check the computer. No more books, no more, forget it, no more books, folks. And you know what, I don't want to repeat this, but what's the name of that town that's nearby here? It's called Wyandotte? Wyandanch. Oh, Wyandanch. Well, in 1971, I got a hold of this individual education newsletter. And they had their first conference in Wyandanch. And they're very proud because this was the beginning of the computers and individualized education. Because you need IEPs, you need individualized education if you're going to do computers. You need individualized education if you're looking forward to workforce training. Obviously, every child's probably going to have sort of a different job, so IEP. So anyway, they're very proud. The individual education, what they call this newsletter is called. They said this is our first newsletter. We're going national now. And they talk about how one of the top, Dwight Allen, I think his name is, he's a top president of a college or something, down with books. That's what I say. The people researching Common Core have got to do their homework. They've got to get into the research, or else they're going to be going nowhere. And even if they win with a Common Core battle, it will come back to haunt them. Of course, in the charter school, or any school that takes tax money. Now, I believe we're going to have, after I speak, the individual that I respect more than anybody in this country, really, it's Edward Griffin. And I don't know if he's going to be talking about this subject. I can't imagine him not doing so. But Edward Griffin, when we talk about the agreements with the Soviet Union, he knows all about that because he interviewed Norman Dodd, who was the research director for the committee that investigated the tax-exempt foundations in 1954. I knew Norman Dodd as well. And Edward Griffin's going to tell you something about that probably, but the most important thing is that Mr. Dodd, when he went up to New York as part of the investigation to talk to the president of the Ford Foundation, Gaither said, Mr. Dodd, like, don't blame us. We got our instructions from the White House. And I guess I really shouldn't. Mr. Salent, I don't know if he really understands that it was Dwight Eisenhower, right? And our instructions are to use our money to bring about a merger with the Soviet Union. Now, a lot of you know that quote. But that's what we're looking at right now. The Soviet Union, people say it's dead. Well, yeah, because it was inefficient and all the way down. But communism is alive and well. It's just like Christianity's not dead. Islam's not dead. Communism's not dead. These isms don't die. Communism is very much alive in this country, through regional government mainly, which we haven't dealt with. Regionalism is communism. You know, all these unelected councils that you have running your lives, the withdrawing again of boundaries, pulling the boundaries out so you're losing your elected officials. 10 minutes is good. And you've got to be very careful when you're explaining to people what this is, because they don't know that we already have the foundation for a communist system through regional government. The only thing that they don't have yet, and now we can count on school choice for that, is the unelected councils across the board. And when the school part of the budget, the United States national budget, is handled by unelected councils, that's the second biggest expenditure in this country after defense. Americans it's very likely they're just going to say, why do we have to have elected commissioners or selectmen or, you know, whatever we have, clerk, and then they'll have us, because we will have no place to go, you know, to complain. Now, a few years ago when I've been, you know, doing a lot of radio for many, many years, and sort of beating up on the American people for not understanding, because we've all had the research out there for the people, and books that we've written, etc. And but something funny happened. I sat down and I thought, oh, I'm so tired of myself. I'm so tired of beating up on the American people. And all of a sudden, from somewhere, came this message to me, which I sort of disagreed with a little bit. Like, it's not their fault. And I thought, not their fault. Well, I've written an article, and you can Google it. It's called The Devil's 7-Pronged Fork. It now has 8 or 9 prongs. Right. And I'm going to tell you, here's my devil's 7-pronged fork. I also said Americans, you know, they're in oblivion, they're in la la land. Now, we're going to go through the 7-pronged fork. The first thing, I suppose the most important thing is gradualism. And I don't really have to explain that to you, because we all know the frog in the cold water, you heat it up gradually. Over 3 generations, how could they ever know, you know, that they're being cooked? All right. And then you have, this is a little more complicated than dialectic, but I think most of you know that nothing really happens by mistake. And if they want something, they create the problem. You know, they give you all phony statistics, get you all hyped up, and then they'll come in with a solution like the Nation at Risk was in my old office in the Department of Ed in the 1980s. They said there were great problems with American education. The test scores were down. Well, you know what? Admiral challenged that report. And the Sandia group, you know, did the research and found out the statistics were quite skewed. They needed that report to get the American people on board for the restructuring of American education to the workforce training. They had to have that report. So that's the dialectic. You create a problem, people scream, you know what you want. I always talked about when I did the laundry for my husband, or he was doing the laundry, he's Belgian and he's going now, but he was doing the laundry and I threw a red sweater in with his white shirts. Yeah, and so he just said politely,